Hi, everyone. Welcome to the first class of Teach the Truth. Teaching the truth is important by working not only to fix the problems of today, but for our future generations. Our purpose is to teach the whole truth and to avoid the aspects of history that make us uncomfortable. So now I will turn it over to Chaplain Cole.
Thank you, Cassidy. Thank you very much. My name is Chaplain Cole Napper, and it is my honor and privilege to welcome you all to the kickoff of Teach the Truth Thursdays. Inspired by the Zen Education Project's Pledge to Teach the Truth rally that was held here in Athens at the site of Lenintown on the campus of the University of Georgia last August, Teach the Truth Thursdays is a 6-week series of classes that start tonight and will run every Thursday from now until May 19th, right before the May 24th primary election. As students of history, we know that no matter how fierce the scourge of hatred is in America, you simply cannot stop progress. You can try and delay it, but you can't stop it. So tonight, as you enter this place, whether it's in person here at the AADM Justice Center or virtually, we want to ask you to meditate on this question. Isn't it time for us to come together and truly love and care for each other, as many of us are commanded to do? You see, Athens is my hometown, and I think it's one of the best cities in the country. And we're at an inflection point in this nation's history. And I believe that we owe it to our state, the great state of Georgia, the very best state in the country, to choose a future for our children that is bright. Because we are also home to the state's flagship university, the University of Georgia, this nation's very first school of public higher education. So as a local post 9/11 veteran and someone who loves my country, I believe that we are being called to be our very best selves as Americans. We're trying to live together as true brothers, sisters, and siblings living together in peace. And that means unifying in a way that can only come from love. That includes love of Georgia's history, including the ugly parts. Yes, especially the ugly parts. In Germany, teaching the subject of the Holocaust and the Nazi era is mandatory in German schools. And in addition to the classroom curriculum, almost all students have either visited a concentration camp or a Holocaust museum or memorial. And so they're able to teach their children, swear to their descendants, no, no, never again. You see, the German people don't shy away from their ugly history. Yet, their kids aren't damaged. In fact, they're strengthened. And they don't feel shame. Instead, they're matured. And they live better, more prosperous lives than their parents did, or their parents before them. So tonight, on behalf of our ancestors, all of our ancestors, the AADM, my co-chair, Beth Mendenhall, and Americans all over the country, we declare that we will teach the truth so that you all can be the very best leaders of your generation. I want to thank all of the volunteers, all of the staff, and the amazing interns of the Athens Anti-Discrimination movement. Thanks to the original co-administrator, Amelia Haynes-Wheeler, Mocha Jasmine Johnson and Noah Johnson, the co-founders of AADM, we thank you. And we acknowledge those educators who were the first to integrate classrooms here in Athens. Specifically, we want to thank you, Mrs. Johnny Leigh Burks and Mrs. Aurelia Scott of the Milestones in History Commemoration Committee for their combined scores of tireless hard work and advocacy in our community. Tonight, we are extremely pleased to have Beth Mendenhall, a world history teacher at Cedar Shoals High School, who will be teaching tonight's class, The Desegregation of Athens, Georgia Schools. Ms. Mendenhall moved to Athens in the summer of 2020 from Indianapolis, Indiana, where she taught high school and middle school history and sociology. Beth is a graduate of Butler University in Indianapolis and holds a master's degree in history from Indiana State University, where she concentrated on the long civil rights movement. Her master's thesis is on the open schools movement during the desegregation crisis following the Brown versus Board of Education decision. Before becoming a teacher, Beth was a radio news reporter and then worked in the concert promotion industry. Her greatest work is raising her 3 daughters who share her passion for fairness and social justice. I understand that we have a few of her students in the audience tonight, so shout out to y'all, Cedar Shoals students, Clark Central too. We got love for everybody here. Without further ado, please help me welcome T3 Thursday's co-administrator and our instructor for the night, Ms. Beth Mendenhall.
Hi. Hello, good evening, everyone, and thank you so much for coming. I'm going to share my screen with you, and my students already know how to do this, but I'm going to open up a Pear Deck. I think we're good to go. I'm going to open up a Pear Deck so you can open another window on your computer, Zoomers, and then go to joinpd.com and then use this code. If you're not on a computer, don't worry, you're not missing out on everything, but it will allow some interaction for our Zoomers to answer some questions. So once everyone gets connected, and feel free if you have something you want to say to use the chat as well. And thank you to my AP students. I'm proud of you for coming. So we're going to talk about the desegregation process here in Athens and how it connects with the national desegregation process. One of the things I have learned in my short time in the South is that we don't really understand our own history. And to me, you can't really understand where you are if you don't know where you started, where you came from, and how you got there. So that's why I think this is kind of important. So as soon as we've got a couple of people on, I will get this started. And once I start, if you need to join in, the code will be up in the corner as well. I think I've got just about everybody. So we are going to do a brief history. Brief, I promise. The mall closes where we are at 7, so somebody with a hook doesn't have to come in here and pull me out. It will already happen. So first of all, I just want you to put either in the chat or in this in the Pear Deck, or for the people here with us tonight at AADM, just shout out. But what do you think the lasting impact is of Brown versus Board of Education? And that was the Supreme Court ruling in 1954 that said schools should be desegregated, that segregated schools were against the Constitution. And if you're on the Pear Deck, you've got a little blank there in your screen that you can type what you think. Can you all see everything? Okay, here in the, I'm trying to move windows around up here. All right, I'm going to change this to see. So this first is correct. It desegregated schools, but it was also, like you note, an important precedent that they could use for other things. And the NAACP used this strategy. They looked at ways that they could fight Plessy versus Ferguson, the separate but equal ruling. And education looked really easy to do. First of all, it was pretty clear that money was being spent on white schools that wasn't being spent on Black schools. So that was easy to establish. And so that was their strategy, was to go after education first. So while it did desegregate schools, it was actually a broader movement as well to desegregate other public spaces as well. This is a really good point. Brown didn't do anything that racist Southerners couldn't get around. And we'll talk about that today, that immediately, especially, there was very little change. And it wasn't just in the South. I'm from Indianapolis, which is the North, and you would be surprised to know that our schools in the area where I lived were not desegregated officially until 1981. So the Northern strategy was different than the Southern strategy, because in Indianapolis, they didn't have schools that said Black and white, but the neighborhoods were Black and white. So it was a different kind of desegregation, but they didn't officially, the lawsuit to bus in Indianapolis started in 1968 and wasn't settled until 1981. And it ended in 2016. That's when they phased out busing, which was not that long ago. So very good. So I want to look at this picture. I think you all have seen this picture of Ruby Bridges, but I also want to show it to you a different way. So what do you think when you look at the first one versus the second one? Yeah. This to me looks like it was a long, long time ago, doesn't it? This looks like it could have been yesterday. Yep. So this is a colorized picture because most of the newspaper pictures were taken in black and white. And I think when we look at these black and white pictures, it makes us, and I think sometimes it's intentional that we see a lot of these things in black and white, because it tells us, oh, this happened a long, long time ago. And most people don't know that Ruby Bridges is still alive. She's not that old, because this was not that long ago. But I think we'd like to think this was ancient history. So I think there's some intent on that. So there's really a movement to colorize a lot of pictures from this era so that we realize that the fight didn't begin that long ago and the fight is still going on. So we're going to start right after the Civil War. So of course, before the Civil War and during slavery, it was illegal, and there would be harsh punishments for someone of color, an enslaved person, to learn how to read or write. Some did, some taught each other, some white people taught enslaved Africans how to read, but it was against the law and there were harsh punishments for doing that. Once the Civil War was over and emancipation happened, there was actually here in Athens a group of African Americans who ran over to UGA and demanded to be let in so they could start learning. And then they were chased off by white people with guns. But one of the things that former slaves wanted to do as soon as they had their freedom was get an education, something that had been denied to them. And they were helped a lot too by private churches, and also the Freedmen's Bureau, which was part of the federal government effort at Reconstruction, Rosenwald schools, which were paid for by a Northern benefactor, and genius supervisors, also financed by people in the North who came down to help train teachers of color. So this school here that you're looking at in the picture is a Rosenwald school, and it is still standing here in Athens. It's right by the J.J. Harris Elementary School. So hopefully we can save this building because it's very historic. So there was actually all of this great effort to educate Black people in Athens, and there hadn't been much effort prior to the Civil War or during this time to educate white people. Mainly education was private, mainly the rich elite people got an education and the poor whites and Black people did not. So at this point in history, there's more funding and effort going towards Black education. So what do you think the reaction was to that by white people? You can put that in the chat. How do you think that went over? Yes, Alejandra, outrage is a good answer. And they certainly started to make efforts to kind of catch up. They were kind of embarrassed and wanted to make sure that the white people were getting an education too, but they were behind. So that's kind of when Georgia started funding public education. So they were kind of shamed into it, I believe. And you can see, just looking at a snippet of the funding in 1929 to 1930, for example, white schools were getting 91% of the state money. And then even though they were 39% of the students were Black. So definitely separate and definitely not equal, which is why it was so easy to challenge this. So, and I want to clarify what equal means too, because the Black schools were smaller and they were in terrible buildings that were falling apart. Sometimes they had no plumbing at all. And their books were old. They got the books that the white schools were done using and had, they were trash. They didn't have very many supplies. The teachers were not paid very well. They were overcrowded. Sometimes these schools operated in shifts. There was a morning school and an afternoon school because they didn't have room for all of the students at once. But even though physically these schools were inferior, the teachers were not. The teachers were superior. And these schools were really cultural centers for the Black community in Athens. So a lot of the teachers were Black women. And at this time, that was really a great way for, it was a route to higher education and upper middle class for Black women. That was the best job that they could find. They were excluded from other careers. They could be maids, or they could get an education and become a teacher, or they could work in the fields. So it was an important job, and it allowed for a lot of social mobility. Any questions or comments anytime you want to? In fact, I will turn up my volume so I can hear you. All right, so here we're looking at a timeline. In 1896, we had the Plessy versus Ferguson ruling that said separate but equal. And then that was challenged in 1954 by Brown, and another ruling right after called Brown 2, which kind of clarified and said that desegregation should happen with all deliberate speed, which also was not very clear. So here in Georgia and in many southern states, they all pledged massive resistance. They signed resolutions, they passed laws. In Georgia, and there were other states that did this too, they passed a law that said, if the federal government forces any of us to put Black and white kids together in a school, we are going to close all of the schools. Any school district that desegregates will lose all state funding immediately. So that was pretty extreme. It did happen. This picture here is Prince Edward County in Virginia. That county had no public schools for 5 years because they didn't want to have desegregation. They call it the lost years. Some white families could find private schools. Some kids would go move and live with relatives so that they could go to school, but a lot of kids just went without school at all. And it makes you realize how entrenched people were, that they were willing to give up any education at all just to not have people of different races together in school. So Little Rock 9, we're all familiar with them. The year after that, there was no high school for an entire year in Little Rock. All 4 high schools closed and people didn't get an education. So in other things that are happening right around here, I don't think there were any here in Athens, but some of the counties surrounding Athens started to try to equalize education. So they were too much or too little too late, but they started dropping a lot of money into Black schools, trying to avoid being forced to desegregate. Some of the counties right around here have these schools that were called equalization schools. In Athens, the CCSD adopts something called freedom of choice. So if you want to go to a different school than you're assigned to, all you have to do is sign up with the school board. Of course, if you were a Black person and you did that, what would happen? That would trigger the state law that would close all the schools. And then groups like HOPE, Help Our Public Education, which started in Atlanta and then spread throughout the state, formed. And these were white women who wanted to keep the schools open. And so they kind of pushed for really token desegregation just so that the schools wouldn't shut down and so that business would continue to come. So here's my question for you. Those of you here are going to have to say out loud what you think. So when in Clark County, CCSD was the dual system of Black and white schools done away with? When did it end? And you can either choose your choice on the Pear Deck, or you can put it in the chat, or you can say it out loud. We got one vote for 63 here. 70. Let's see what we have in our, another 63. So 1970 is the correct answer. Very good. So the segregationists were represented not by the Klan, because we were trying to be a little more polite about it down here in the South. Instead, they had white citizens councils, which some people call the Uptown Klan. So they were, they met pretty privately, and I don't know that they've publicized who was in these groups, but they were supporting the segregationists. A lot of politicians were running on this idea of keeping the schools separate. The governor of Georgia said, no, not one Black child would come into a white school, and they were overwhelmingly elected and supported. And like I said, the school closing law would immediately close any schools that were forced to desegregate. So my question to you, and we talked about the freedom of choice as well, is how did this, or do you think, maybe it didn't, how would this place a burden on Black students and families? And you can put that in the chat or here in the room. See what you all think. I agree, the students would feel some type of way. So this is really important, that they would be blamed. So imagine that you decided, I want to go to the white school. It looks nicer, the windows work. I heard they even have air conditioning, and the books aren't already written on and all bent. I'm going to march down and sign up, and then all of the schools close. Who's everybody going to be mad at? Yeah. So there's a story I came across. It really is Atlanta, not Athens, but a Black family moved into town, and the teenage son, thought he would be helpful while the family's unpacking, and it was summertime. So he walked down to the school that was just down the street and registered and signed up. That was a white school. He didn't know that. By the time he walked home, his dad had been fired from his job, and the lease had been revoked for their house. So it was very hostile. I know it's shocking now, but it wasn't, like, we know racism exists today, but to me, and I've researched this a lot, it's still shocking to see how blatant and open the racism was back then. All right, anyone know what is happening in this picture here? This is a big event right here in Athens. Yep. Yep, this is the desegregation of UGA, which is important in Athens for a couple of reasons. So once this happened, when Charlene Hunter and Hamilton Holmes entered UGA, that triggered the law. So that said, Georgia, you're going to have to close down UGA because two Black kids just entered your school and enrolled in your school. So do you want to be the governor of Georgia who closes UGA? That would not get you reelected. So within weeks, those laws were all repealed. And so that really kind of set in motion, allowing places like Atlanta and Athens to desegregate sooner. So by 1963, Black students started attending all white schools. It was only a few the first year. Walucia Green, Marjorie Green, Agnes Green, Bonnie Hampton, and Scott Michael were the first students. And then in 1964, the Civil Rights Act passed, which added some protection. Now looking at this picture, which is in color. So does this look like desegregation or integration? And is there a difference between those two things? So here we have one African-American girl in a crowd of white people. That's what desegregation looks like. That is token desegregation, where you can say, well, no, we're not an all-white school. We have a few Black people. That's not integration. That's not, mixing people and reflecting the percentages in the community. So after a few years after that, and here are some of the women that we were talking about that Chaplain Cole was talking about earlier: Jeanette Browning, Johnny Leigh Burks, Ruth Hawk Payne, Betty Henderson Holston, and Victoria Baker Stroud are the first Black teachers who go into the all-white schools. Because it's one thing to have a Black student in your class, but it's a whole nother thing for white kids to have Black teachers. And so they picked the cream of the crop to go into those white schools, and they did very well. I know that the first time I had a Black teacher was when I was in college, and that's really pretty sad. So at the same time, we have our first private schools opening in Athens, the Athens Academy and the Athens Christian Academy. The timing is not an accident. These kinds of schools opened all over the South, and they are called segregation academies. Then CCSD gets in trouble from the federal government to really desegregate in 1969, or they're going to start losing federal funds. And this is why in 69 and 70, you really see things start to move, and it's because of all these federal funds being held back. And that's, I think I said Title IX, but Title VI of the Civil Rights Act. And then busing starts, and we're going to watch a video in a second about that. So it's also in 1970, something happens called Rowdy Thursday, and we'll talk about that in more detail in a little bit. So these are some of the women, some of the Black teachers who were chosen to join white teachers in the formerly white schools. And they were well aware that they were chosen and that they were the icebreakers, and they had a very big responsibility. So this is a statement from the superintendent of CCSD in 1969 about busing. He said, for half a century, we've been busing Black students past white schools and vice versa to maintain segregation. Now we're busing to eliminate segregation. So Charles McDaniel and the superintendent that came right after him supported busing. I understand that both of them had crosses burned on their lawns for doing that. So, and we're going to watch this video. I'm just going to open a different tab. So we're not going to watch this whole thing, but this is an archived video from 1972 about busing. At the time of this video in the North, there were riots in Boston and Detroit and other places over busing. So this is The story they're telling is how successful busing has been right here in Athens, Georgia.
The largest inland cotton market in the world before the boll weevil hit and the cotton kingdom was killed. And it was a town that grew up around the founding of the plantation, and a lot of houses in Athens that was based on the ownership of slaves and the cultivation of cotton.
Clark County schools have been desegregated since 1969. The Supreme Court ruled in 1970 in a case brought by some Clark County parents that the county's desegregation plan was legal and workable. Thus, Clark is the only school district in the United States with a Supreme Court stamp of approval.
And I think the average Southerner, and you know we're in the Bible Belt, average Southerner actually had a little pang of conscience that he hadn't treated the Negro right. I think that was in all of them. Also down deep, we Southerners, with all of our hot-headedness, we have a kind of respect for government.
The Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment does not entitle persons to choose which school their child will attend. I'm Eugene Epting, attorney for the Board of Education of Clark County, Georgia, and this is an excerpt from a brief filed by us in the Supreme Court of the United States in support of the position of the Clark County Board of Education. I'm opposed to the busing, too. I wish it wasn't necessary. But as long as the housing patterns remain what they are, busing is necessary.
Certainly one of the most frustrating problems of this whole business of busing has been our relationship, or at least the school superintendents and school administrators' relationship with the president and many other officials. We are faced with the problem of having to desegregate schools, and yet we're also faced with the problem that the president and our governor and most of the officials in the country have said that they are against busing. This is frustrating because most of our children live in black neighborhoods and white neighborhoods. And of course, when we then have to desegregate, we're going to either have to move some of these children out or move some other children in order to be able to have a mixed school or an integrated school.
I'm Estelle Farmer, principal of the Oglethorpe Avenue School in Athens, Georgia. From our point of view, in this particular school, busing has worked out satisfactorily. Our children are making progress academically. They seem to be happy, adjusted. It seems to me that we're making progress as a unitary school in this district.
Boys and girls, we're going to talk a little bit now about the story that we read about Dr. Dan. And do you remember when he built the hospital? What was so important about that hospital? It has to do with our discussion today. Okay, Regina?
He was the first black man to make the hospital for whites and blacks.
For whites and blacks. That was the first hospital in Chicago to ever have both white people and black people. Do you think that was a good idea?
Yes.
Why do you think it was a good idea, Regina?
Because, like, if there was a white hospital way over on the other side of town, if someone gets sick, they would have to go way over there.
That's right. Okay, Marty?
Like, if you were in front of the hospital, the only white people could go to, and like Wanda got hit, you had to take her way over there just to get her to another hospital.
Okay, all.
Like a black person gets sick, and they have to come across town, and about the time they get across town, they probably be dead.
That's right. That was a good point.
Just because your friend...
I think it's working just beautifully. We have children from very different backgrounds. It's an exciting environment to be in. The children feel this, and we feel this. And the biggest benefit is having children learn from one another. Did any of you learn anything special or that you felt is important this morning from our story about prejudice, about the way we're different? Regina?
You can like your friends whether what color they are.
Okay. Terry?
If someone's wearing glasses, that doesn't mean you can't like them, because someday you might have to wear glasses.
That's right. Steve?
Somebody calls you names, it doesn't mean that you're not any worse than them.
Right. Karen?
It's nice to have colored and White friends because the colored are just as nice as some of the white.
When you play football and the quarterback tell you.
If we had an all-black school, there wouldn't be different environments contributing, and there wouldn't be as much learning from one another. I really think that busing has been a great boon to education.
A majority of parents were in favor of integration, but a majority of parents were also opposed to busing.
My personal fears wasn't so much for the integration, it's just the fact that I can't see busing a kid past one school to get him to another one. I've never been able to understand this. I still don't understand this. He's got a wonderful teacher, and he's learning real well, but I'd still chuck it for neighborhood school system.
I personally am against busing. I'd rather my children go to school in an integrated school because they're going to have to live with it 10, 20 years from now.
I, too, am not quite sure that busing is the answer. And as a way of achieving equal educational opportunities for the black student, if it does this, then it's good. But I'm wondering if we can do it some other way.
Well, how can we do it another way? You see, black children live in certain areas of the city. White children live in certain other areas of the city. Now, how do you do away with a dual school system without doing some transportation of children?
Why do you like coming to Oglethorpe Avenue on a bus? Why do you like it? Oliver?
Like when it be real cold, you won't have to go out in the cold and walk to school. You can just go on the bus.
Okay. Regina?
Like if it be snowy, your hands won't have to freeze walking in the snow.
Tom?
In the summertime, you'll be on the bus and be watching everything out like little birds on the tree, something like that.
Okay, you get to see a lot, don't you?
I think children are much less upset by change than we as adults are. And I doubt that children suffer the way we may anticipate that they're going to.
Like my parents were really scared more than I was, and they're the ones that made me scared. And like I was scared maybe the first week, but after I got in there and it wasn't as bad as everybody said it was.
But a lot of white parents, I don't think they wanted it to happen, but it's one thing they couldn't stop, I guess.
When I got there, and I proved them wrong because I got along with them just fine. And my mother still gives me problems like, well, Leo is one of my best friends. Sometimes he wants just to talk, so he calls and talks. And Mother says, well, what does he call here for, And I said, well, just because he wants to talk. He says, well, I don't like him calling. And I said, well, look, Mother, I said, everybody's entitled to their friends. And just because a few of mine are black, don't cut me down for it. Leo's just one of my good friends. You got good friends, I got good friends, too. It just happened a couple of mine are black, She doesn't understand, but I think she will after a while. Hope so, anyway.
Don't communicate your fears to your children any more than you can possibly help, because they are going to have to live with a situation that you have never lived with. And you really don't know, and they don't know what's going to happen in it. And they pick up instinctively your attitudes, and your attitudes may cause problems when they have to face things that you didn't face.
I can honestly say that I don't think the adults, white and black, don't get along as good as the children, the teenagers do. I think it's going to have to start with us. We're going to have to start getting it together because I think they're not going to try.
So that is from 1972.
Wow.
So yeah, it's really. So one of the things that, and I don't know if you want to share anything that, I'm good, thank you. Anything that you noticed about what some of the people were saying, things that you thought were interesting or ironic?
Just this last little girl, well, not even just her, all of the kids, like she said, they're unfazed by it. And they just see, oh, this is somebody my age, let's play. That's all kids see. They don't see, well, they see color, but it is not a barrier for them. So they're just so innocent.
Yep, very good point. What were the white men saying about busing or What was their point?
Someone mentioned like, the kids are gonna have to look at this down the line, and I'm like, yeah, they are. You haven't had, them as parents haven't had to deal with that, you know, you haven't, but the world is evolving, and you're gonna have to deal with things that you did not have to previously. My grandmother now has to deal with technology. She didn't have to deal with that before, so, I mean, it's something.
That's right. Anybody else? Zoomers, do you have anything to say? So one thing that I noticed was, you know, they were all like, well, we're for desegregation, but can we do it without busing? And it kind of makes me laugh in a sarcastic, satirical way, because Black students for years would go miles past, they would pass 2 or 3 white schools on their way to their neighborhood school. And, you know, nobody worried about that, or white people didn't worry about that, I guess. So I thought you would enjoy that clip. I think it's really nice. So there is definitely a triumphant tone to the video. And I feel like a lot of what growing up I read about desegregation was very triumphant sounding. I kind of had the idea that Ruby Bridges went to school, the Little Rock 9 went to school. It was kind of rough that first year. And then racism was over. That's the way it was presented to me. And maybe that's the way I wanted to hear it too. So after watching that video, if we can read and hear some of the voices of these Black students who desegregated the schools, I think it hits a little different. So Fanny Smith, the one thing you really felt is that you were totally isolated. Once you went out of the classroom, you're on your own. And if you went to lunch, you were on your own. It's like you're on an island by yourself. These are little kids. These are, you know, 3rd, 4th, 5th graders. We were taught about nonviolence. We were taught to ignore the taunts. We were taught to ignore the stares, to ignore anything that anybody did to us, because we were warned that it was not going to be easy and it may not be pleasant, but we were there for a purpose. And that's Linda Davis, who is on our school board now. So she and I had a long conversation about this a few months ago. They knew what they were doing was important. They weren't just little kids who went to a different school one day and noticed that all the other students around them were white. They knew that they were part of a bigger movement. And it wasn't something that they enjoyed doing, but they knew what they were doing was important. It was pretty obvious that the white schools were better as far as getting an education. You could tell by the school books. At the Black school, we got the books that they couldn't use at the white schools anymore. You'd get books with pages torn out, and white schools would get new updated books, the Lucia Green. Some people would be friendly in class, but not in the halls where other people could see you. It was like they wanted to be nice, they just didn't want other people to know they were being nice. Marjorie Turner. The disappointment I have out of that is that none of the Black schools survived. That's when the erasure of the Black community really officially launched, and that's Linda Davis again. So there was a sense of pride in these Black schools. They had very dedicated teachers. They could promote Black history. They talked about Black history. They sang Black history songs, and they lost that, you know, when they had to move to the white schools. So looking at what the student said and the video, what do you notice? What is different from one thing to another? And you can write in the Pear Deck, hi, Masao, welcome. Or you can put something in the chat, or you can speak up if you're in the room, or you can unmute and speak up on Zoom. Let's see what we got here.
White students in the video, they knew, well, they know that it's a problem being integrated, but they don't know what the problem is. They're just going with what they hear. Like one of the little boys was like, the white little boy was like, if they're so far, if he wants to one of his classes, it's like if such and such is if she gets hit or something, he said, then she's gonna have to go way over there to the hospital. Like he understands that she can't go to the same hospital as him, but he doesn't. I don't think they understand why at that young age. They're just like, well, you can't. You're no different from me, so you just can't. Like,
Yep, good response. Isolation. Let's see. Some students were probably still racist. That is true. They probably weren't going to speak up when the film crew was there. I'm sure the classroom was carefully curated. Yeah. So has anyone heard of Rowdy Thursday? I hope some graduate student somewhere. Oh, I'm looking. Yes, so and thank you. Somebody said the video doesn't show any bad experiences. Like everyone's like, integration's great.
It also only seems to interview like white students.
You're right. And a white teacher. Yeah, it's a white perspective. You're right. Good point. So anyway, I hope that some graduate student does their master's thesis or PhD thesis on Rowdy Thursday. There needs to be a book on Rowdy Thursday. So this was in April of 1970. This is right before Athens High and Bernie Harris are the two high schools, the white high school and the black high school. And they're going to close down Bernie Harris and open up Athens High as a integrated school. So on this day, a bunch of students, they were upset about a newspaper article. There's disruptions at both high schools over, because there are some black students at Athens High, just not very many. But so there's disruptions, some vandalism, class cutting, kids are gathering, it turns into a big march. The kids that were involved in it, the police issue restraining orders, which seems a little extreme. But they have a march and a black buyers boycott happens. There's several days of marches, tear gas is used, people are arrested, all over this integration because many of the black students feel they're losing their school and they're just going to be folded into a white school, which kind of seems like that was the plan. So this is a quote from one of the kids who participated in it. It looked like Bernie Harris and everything that it was associated with it was going to be swallowed up in this merger. We had everything to lose and nothing to gain. So they did get the attention of the school board after several days of the marches and problems at both of the high schools. There were a lot of police in both high schools. Bernie Harris asked for them not to be in their high school. The high school itself said, please don't send the police here. We've got it. But instead of calling it Athens High School, they wanted a new name, which became Clark Central. They wanted school colors. There's one from each school. That's how it got the red and gold. They wanted a black principal. Bernie Harris became a middle school after the merger. They wanted at least one assistant football coach who was black. They wanted to make sure that everyone could be in all of the clubs. They wanted, and I think this is important, they wanted all of the school people to go through desegregation training at UGA. They wanted their textbooks to have multiple perspectives, multi-ethnicities. They wanted to make sure they had heard that some black teachers were not getting their contracts renewed. So they wanted to keep the racial ratio correct and Black studies added to the school curriculum, which currently is not in our school curriculum. ironically. So these were things that they worked out with the school board. They had a meeting with the school board. So for high school students, I think that's pretty cool. These are some clips from the local newspapers about what was happening. I'm going to show you something. The grievances and discussions, student marches, an editorial against the violence. Of course, these are white newspapers. But looking at these demands, how do you think, what does that say about what the students were feeling? And you can, oh, I didn't mean to put that up there. You can put something in the chat if you want. Or respond on the Pear Deck. Yeah, I think anger and a sense of loss is a very good comment. Yep, not eager. Thank you, Ms. Benson. I was talking to a friend who knew a student over at Athens High the year that that happened, and she was one of many children. So as she recalls, parents, white parents found out what was happening and came and picked up their children. Well, she was one of many siblings, and so nobody came to get her because there was too many things going on in her household. So she walked home, and her dad came home at lunch and said, "What are you doing here? Why aren't you at school?" And she said, "Oh, you know, there's this riot that happened." It wasn't a riot, but she called it a riot. And she told him what was going on. And he said, "You better get back to school. History is happening right now." And she did. She went back to school. All right. So as I was going through the archives and just going through old editions of the Daily News of Athens, I found some things I wasn't really looking for, which is what historians love to do. That's the whole, the hunt. But one of these things, so Rowdy Thursday was April, well, this must be Thursday, April 16th, right around that time when all of this is happening, the state school board passes a ruling that says children don't have to go to school in the county where they live. Interesting timing, I thought, don't you think? Maybe it's a coincidence, but probably not. And this article here, so I was looking for this article about what was going on at Athens High and Bernie Harris, but then I noticed right below it is an article about a new private Christian academy opening in Athens. Right under that article. Interesting placement. Again, coincidence? Probably not. So another thing that happened in that summer were freedom schools and a liberation school that started at UGA. I don't know a whole lot about it, and I would like to learn more about it. If you're that graduate student, make sure you cover that in your project too. I think it's pretty cool. They were basically trying to train people in how to live with integration. And I know they started it, and then like the local communities was supposed to continue it. So, but here are just some more comments about from people who lived in this. We lost that community feeling. You know, the old saying, it takes a community to raise a child. And I think that back when I was growing up, we had a community, and I don't know if these kids now have a community. An entire culture was lost because we had to incorporate ourselves into their culture. Whereas when we had BHHS, it was our high school. That was ours. And we lost that when we had to go to another institution. Even though it might have been better, the material things, the main thing that was lost was the love, the caring, and the embracing that we got from our teachers. And that was Agnes Green. So fast forward to today. And so the broad question that I want you to think about is, what's the end? What did this all do? How did it help? Is looking at these numbers. So in our community, that's the first column. Our community is 55% white, 28% Black, 11% Hispanic, Latino, 4% Asian, and 2% multiracial. By the way, if you're wondering, what about the Latino students? In the 1970s, there were very few Latinos in Athens. There were probably, from what I've researched, 400 Latinos in all of Georgia in like the late 60s. That immigration didn't really start until the late 70s, early 80s. But in other states like California, there were lawsuits. There were Hispanic schools, and they sued to get integrated as well. But look at Athens percentages and then the CCSD enrollment and the staff and the faculty. What do you notice? What does this make you think about?
A lot of the white students are maybe enrolled in, are enrolled in private schools or not CPA, not public schools in the county.
Yeah, I mean, to me, when I look at I think schools should reflect the communities they're in. And when the numbers are different, then it makes you wonder what's happening. Well, let's look at the next slide. So here's the demographics of the Athens Academy, which is alive and well, Athens Christian Academy, and Oconee County Schools. And I've got at the bottom the slide where these numbers are coming from. The private schools don't report their numbers to the Georgia DOE, so it's a little harder to. Does that come as a surprise to anyone from around here? And it's like Ms. Benson is saying, white flight. And then we can see also, so population growth that's happened. Clark County's population has been growing steadily, but look at how much Oconee County has been growing. And, coincidence, maybe, but this would definitely support a theory that white flight was happening. Whites going to private schools and whites moving out of the county. And then this, I know, is really hard for you to see probably on your home computer. And even here it's small, but these are the, and you can look at this on the, what I did was I took the district map for our elementary schools and then took the school enrollment demographics and kind of put them together. And you can see, like, we have schools, this school up here, and I know it's too small to see what school this is. This might be J.J. Harris. There's a school here with 0 white people or 0 white students. And there's 2 here and 1 here. So even within our district, we see, and it just could be residential. I mean, it's not like the lines are super weird, but you can see that our housing patterns we haven't fully integrated, in my opinion. I don't know, is there anything else that you guys noticed on this map? Zoomers, feel free to speak up or chat. When we did this presentation in the fall, somebody said, well, it looks to me like we need to redistrict, looking at this map, which it's not wrong. So last question, and then we can just open it up to Q&As or say goodnight, whatever y'all want to do. But what's the legacy of segregation or desegregation, and how do we honor these students and teachers?
The loss of cultures today.
Yeah. I don't know if y'all could hear that on Zoom, but one of our guests said the loss of culture. So, and if you go back, I think I can do this without. So if you go back and look, the faculty is so white, even though the schools really are Black and brown, the faculty is not. So
change that we want to see in the future. Keep advocating for what we know is right. Wherever we are, educate people that we, I don't want to say know, but suspect how we don't know about a lot of things that are going on, like especially with redistricting, like specifically here in Athens, that's really big now, and a lot of people had no clue about it or even how it's going to affect them, where they're living, where their children go to school. So just educating our communities on that and getting involved in our local government committees. Us as residents, we have that right, and so we need to get involved in this so that we can make the change that we want to see.
very nice. Strong people, good, and miss out, honor by talking about the situation honestly in the community. I think that's. Is this all stuff that you already knew? Things that are surprising?
I
Good.
grew up in Connecticut, and it is pretty clear to see that it's a lot of segregation in school system right now. The public high school is pretty diverse, but my parents sent me to the Catholic schools, which there were a number of, which were dominantly white, and it's just kind of it's kind of a lot to see. Like that's supposed to, yeah, it's just,
It is a lot. Yeah, Masao was saying he's surprised that there are 3 schools with no white kids. Yeah, it is surprising. I was shocked, when I researched this at just like the blatant racism. It's still shocking, even though you see it over and you never get used to it, the way people talked and acted.
Was still alive, but just hearing it, every time I hear it, I'm just like, this woman is still alive. I think it's not that long ago.
It's not.
I was shocked when I first moved here 17 years ago. I subbed for about a couple of years in the elementary schools. And when I walked in and there was a predominance of Black students, I thought it was kind of odd. It's like, wait a minute, how did that happen? Because it didn't reflect what I was seeing in the community. And I had to start asking questions. And I heard about white flight, and I heard everybody going to Coney County and private schools, and oh my God. Yeah, I was shocked.
So I think going forward, like Masao said, we honor this by talking about it. And, embracing the history, the good, the bad, the ugly, and using it as a, way to move forward when we see it. Well, does anyone have any questions or comments for the good of everyone? Because they will kick us out fairly soon. We've got a little bit of time if anybody wants
I
to.
have a question.
Yes.
I know there's the Joy Village School that has started up. That seems to be really popular. And it's going to be really well done. It is predominantly for Black students and Black culture. So culture can be honored, and valued. It's not totally Black. The woman is running. I've seen, I think, the pictures, 1 or 2 white kids mixed in, which was a great idea. But I'm wondering about how this is going to go over in our community. I think we have to honor the culture and make sure culture is not lost. But can we do that in this way, sort of forming a school that's more segregated? I was just wondering how that's going to play out with people.
Yeah. Well, it's sort of like an HBCU, which, I mean, it's not that they took Blacks only, they would take anyone, but because they would take anyone, but I mean, you went to an HBCU.
Yeah, I think it's like going to a same gender school too. Like, I went to Spelman, which is all Black and all women's, but there were some parents who felt very strongly that, single gender education was the way to go, whether it was for boys or girls. It was, a choice that they had. So I think that this, is kind of the same thing. I know they're just getting started at the Joy School, but it's not like a large number of Black kids that are going there. They're just getting started, so maybe they will be huge. But right now, it's just another option for parents.
I had thought of it as the HBCU, but I understand that's really good.
Yeah.
It's a good way of looking at it.
Because I think they welcome anyone. Yeah.
Absolutely.
I know a lot of Jewish professors went to HBCUs because they weren't getting hired, in the 50s and 60s, and they completely supported the civil rights movement. A lot of them were refugees who had just fled Nazi Germany. But
absolutely.
Yeah. So Ms. Benson is asking me where I got my research. So I did spend a lot of time researching desegregation in general when I was getting my master's. But here locally, there's a book. Help me out, Chaplain Cole, because my brain is fried. Michael Thurman's book.
Oh,
that's really good.
History. Oh my God. Give me 30 seconds. 30 seconds.
Yeah, well, there's Michael Thurman's book, which has just been reissued not too long ago. You can even get it at Target. And the public library has all on microfilm, A Story Untold. Thank you very much. I just knew I wasn't going to grab that. The file cabinet in my brain the drawer was stuck. Yeah, it happens. But then the library was great. They were very helpful. They pulled stuff out of the archives. They had the newspapers on microfilm, but also they had hand copied sheets of what I think became the Black newspaper, but it was before there was somebody was just like typing up what that was going on in town and passing it out on hand copied flyers. And they had a stack of those. So thank you. It was fun. Researching is a lot of fun. All right. Anything else? Well, thank you so much, everyone. I'll turn it back over to you to close, but thank you. It's been my pleasure. I really enjoyed talking about this, and I'm so glad so many of you are here.
Yeah, so we're giving it up here again for Beth Mendenhall. Thank you for an amazing class, the Desegregation of Athens, Georgia Schools. I learned more this time than I did the last time, and that's just a blessing all by itself. So on behalf of the Athens Anti-Discrimination Movement and on behalf of our amazing interns who've been here helping us out in the background to make sure that things went seamlessly. We thank the studio audience, those who came out live and got free dinner. We thank you for your support. We also just want to let everybody know that again, this is just the first of 6 weeks. So we have another 5 weeks after this. Next week, next Thursday at 5:00 p.m., the class will be Dr. Mary Frances Early. It will be taught by graduate student, University of Georgia graduate student, Damaris Dunn, and it is going to be exceptional. So we will be putting out information on social media. Check out the Athens Anti-Discrimination Movement's website and Facebook page for more information. But that's it. That's it for tonight. Thank you all so very, very much. God bless you and have a great night.
Thank you, Miss Mendenhall. Fabulous. Thank you, Chaplain Cole.
Hi, Barb.
Fabulous.
Good to see you. Thank you for
Wonderful.
being here.
Thank you all.
Thank you all. Have a great night.